everybody in Canada, and good evening to Yifa and anyone listening from Israel or afar. My name is Andrea Spindle, and I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation, which is a registered charity based in Toronto. We're focused on combating anti-Semitism in several ways. Firstly, by debunking the lies about Israel and Jewish rights to the land, and secondly, by promoting the adoption and application of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. We invite you to join us in this battle, so come and check us out at www.caef.ca. Today, our speaker, Yifa Segal, will explain how we can use the international definition, or the IHRA, to combat anti-Semitism. But just before we do that, I want to explain that we are keeping all of the attendees right now on mute and video off so that your attention will be focused on Yifa. But after she's finished, we will take questions, and you can ask a question by using the little icon on where your name appears and raising your hand, at which time I'll acknowledge you and give you an opportunity to verbally ask your question, and then mute you after you've asked it. Okay, if there's any questions you don't get to ask today, you can send them on to myself to forward to Yifa or directly to her. It's now my pleasure to introduce Yifa, who's an expert in law and the director of the International Legal Forum based in Tel Aviv, where she's speaking from today. Yifa has a law degree and a master's in international relations and affairs. She was previously an attorney with Sharat Hadin, which is the Israel Law Center, and a joint director with Tasbeat News Agency, which is unique in itself. It's a nonprofit news agency in Israel. Her organization defends and advances human rights on the international arena. Welcome, Yifa.
Oh, thank you very much. I hope that we won't get the same type of entertainment this evening as we did last time. So thanks again for everyone who's taking the time again to join us this evening or this afternoon for this short webinar. Just a few words about my organization. What we've done about 5 years ago is that we came to the conclusion that the legal battle for Israel basically focuses on anti-terrorism, anti-Semitic actions around the world, and as well as BDS and delegitimization needs to be conducted as a network, needs to be done together jointly, needs to have a strategic planning and overview from a global perspective, and not just focus on local efforts of organizations or lawyers that are doing their best in their own local arenas. And so this was the vision of the organization, to create a hub where people can come together, can consult, can form coalitions, they can ask for information or evidence or connections to Israeli government officials or ministries, get access to whatever they need through that network. And this is the important role, I believe that we're doing, kind of bringing everybody together. And I'm very happy to share with you that within that 5 years, we were able to bring together over 3,000 lawyers from 32 countries around the world. We've also formed a partnership with the Ministry of Strategic Affairs that has been helping us in the last year to further empower that network and do it faster, more efficiently, and stronger actions in all these 3 different legal arenas that I just mentioned. And so one of them, as I said, is anti-Semitism. And unfortunately, as we see every day all over the world, anti-Semitism is on the rise, and it has been on the rise for years now. And if any one of us has thought that this is a problem that our grandparents or previous generations had to deal with, and that problem is now gone, I hope that we're now waking up to the fact that the problem is not just that it's not passed from the world, is that it's actually growing. And when I say that it's growing, people often confuse, because the way that we see it, there are 3 different types of anti-Semitism. So we have classical anti-Semitism that we've seen starting from the early centuries after Christ, and that is basically targeting Jews based on their religion. Jews as a religion is a problem. Jews killed Christ. Jews are infidels. Jews are sons of the devils, all this type of blood libels that we know. And that was the first type of anti-Semitism. The second type of anti-Semitism that obviously has peaked in the days of Nazi Germany is the targeting of Jews as a race. That was a new language that started growing in the world. And as I said, it peaked during the time of the Nazi regime in Germany and throughout Europe. And the third type of anti-Semitism that we see now growing the last few decades, and I think really peaking now in the last couple of years, is the targeting of Jews as a nation, as a people. And of course, it manifests itself as hatred toward the Jewish state, but not just the Jewish state, any type of anti-Semitic actions or rhetoric against Jews because of their affiliation as a people or their support of the Jewish state, anything that they can hide behind to try to legitimize the same old type of hatred that we've seen throughout centuries that leads always to the exact same place. Jews need to be destroyed, Jews need to be killed, Jews have too much power, Jews are corrupt, and you guys know the drill. So this is why I think that IHRA is the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. If you guys don't know it, it's an organization that was basically established. It's an international organization that was established in the year 2000. And in the beginning, their mission statement was very simple, relatively. They wanted to focus on Holocaust remembrance. That was it. Of course, there's a lot to do there, but after about 15 years, they come to the conclusion that teaching people about the Holocaust is not really enough in the effort to prevent what can possibly be the next Holocaust. And so what they've decided to do is to work on the adoption of a working definition for anti-Semitism. And what does that mean? It means that for centuries, as we said before, this problem of anti-Semitism has been around for centuries, but we didn't really have like a legal definition, something to go and have some kind of a reference to understand what really constitutes anti-Semitism. So we had to rely basically on our gut. And so this is very subjective. This is very individual. So I might be upset or offended or hurt or whatever because of something that I heard was said or done by someone else, and another person might be less sensitive to it, might have a different understanding to it, might have a different historical reference or background to the same situation, and for them it's, you know, it's legitimate criticism, or maybe it's not so nice, but it's not so bad. And this is, I think, a problem that the IHRA organization has come to understand. We need to create now, for the first time ever, as I said, a legal definition, something to go back to. And if we see an act or hear a statement that makes us feel uncomfortable, we can go back to the definition, see what it says, and check ourselves if it does or does not constitute as an anti-Semitic act according to that legal definition. So that was an amazing progress, I think, in 2016, the end of 2016, where that definition was created and adopted by IHRA, and that was an important first step. Second step was to bring the countries around the world to recognize, even though a lot of countries, there are many countries that are members of IHRA, but still they haven't, that doesn't mean that they have officially adopted that definition into their own domestic judicial system, laws, and values. And so the second wave was to get these countries to formally adopt it, whether it was in the form of a resolution or a public statement or different ways of doing this. And today, I think we're in a pretty good place. We have around 20 countries around the world. We also have the EU and other international bodies that have referenced IHRA or adopted IHRA. And this is an important second step. Now, I think while this second step, we see most of the countries that, you know, we refer to or we work with that have adopted it already, there is still work to be done. For example, in Latin America, we are now until the coronavirus took over all of the attention of the public, we were very active in trying to get Latin American countries to also join in and adopt IHRA into their domestic laws. Uruguay was the first country to do that. And I felt, together with our partners on the ground, that we're making very good progress, and we believe that Uruguay was the first domino, but of course everything was kind of paused because of the world's focus now on the issue of the coronavirus. And just one word about that, and I said that also last time, and I think most of us kind of understand that while the world's attention now is really focused on its health issues, fighting the coronavirus, issues of local economy, social problems, poverty, etc., etc., it does not mean that anti-Semitism has disappeared from the world. And I think, and I've spoken to a lot of people that showed kind of a beautiful optimism about it, you know, because this is a virus that kind of will prove to everybody that there's no difference between skin color or blood type or religion or ethnicity, and it will bring everybody together, and we're all in the same boat, and let's join hands and sing kumbaya and help each other, and it will be a beautiful change in the world. Well, I'm sorry guys, you know, it was a beautiful dream. That's not where we are. Unfortunately, what I do see is that people that had, you know, their opinions before we entered into this corona crisis are now even more convinced in the righteousness of their ways or beliefs. If you are anti-American, for example, so now you're more anti-American. If you were anti-Chinese, you're more anti-Chinese. If you are anti-Semitic, my friends, you become more and more anti-Semitic, and that is just the fact. So we see it now. You know, it's very hard for them, thank God. I mean, we follow them all the time, all these organizations, we want to see what they do. It's very hard for them to generate attention now that the world is, as we said, focused on the other things. But we know that, you know, that they are spreading their lies and their blood libels. They're waiting for the attention to, you know, to just a little bit of a crack in the public attention, so they can put in their poison and help to increase anti-Semitism. We also see it in the streets in some cities around the world. We see it in New York, we see it in New Jersey, unfortunately also in Israel. And this is something that we need to be very minded for, because there will come a day, the day after Corona will come. And I think it's a great time for all of us to plan, to prepare, and to really take the time to further study this topic and come together and join hands in a strategic plan. So that's my general remarks. I'm gonna start now a very short PowerPoint presentation, just to use this opportunity to get you guys more familiar with the language of IHRA, and maybe just a few of the questions or the criticism that is heard around the world about IHRA, so I can tell you how I see it and how you can maybe use that type of arguments to defend against IHRA. And then, you know, just a few examples of caricatures and statements that were made on social media and other platforms, and we will then go through the drill together of deciding whether this statement or caricature does constitute anti-Semitism, an anti-Semitic statement according to IHRA, or not, because some of them will not fall within that category. But before I proceed, I did want to say one more thing. I think it's very important. I think that we need to understand that there's another way, or that there's an additional way. There's an important third step that we need to make, and it doesn't necessarily have to depend on the second step, meaning that in countries that have already adopted IHRA, we now need to mobilize ourselves for the next step, which is to educate the people about IHRA. Very basic. It can be something like I'm about to do for you guys now. Give them the examples, get them to be more familiar with the language of IHRA and how to use it, how to implement it. And I will say one thing. It does not necessarily have to be a part of the law. Why? Because in every Western country that I know, that I work in, which is about, I told you, 32 countries, they all have laws about that can counter discrimination or harassment or a hate crime or hate speech, except for the United States, of course. We all have those laws. Law enforcement and the legal system is already equipped to deal with anti-Semitic crimes. So why do we need IHRA, and why do we need to further educate these people? Because the problem is not with lack of legislation. The problem is with enforcement and the understanding of the people who need to implement it, of what really constitutes anti-Semitism. Because if someone goes and say, you know, let's kill all the Jews. So I think if someone says, let's kill all the Jews, then most people in the world would understand that as being anti-Semitic. But what about things, and we'll see them in a minute, that are, you know, that has a bit more subtlety in them, that semantics, or the anti-Zionist statements, or things that people nowadays don't understand, that this is to something that is anti-Semitic. And this is, I think, very, very important. We need to, I'll tell you that before the Corona crisis started, we formed a partnership with the Bar Association, for example, and we were supposed to travel the world together with the bar, in the name of the Bar Association, from one bar association to another bar association, to do this type of symposiums and to teach the lawyers and the judges and even law enforcement about, you know, what anti-Semitism looks like today, because they don't know. Again, if you yell, let's kill all the Jews, they get it. But what about all the other cases? They really, really, really don't understand. And so I really do think that a lot of our efforts, even maybe possibly most of our efforts, needs to now be devoted to that. Education, education, education. Understand, letting people understand the connection between IHRA, how to use IHRA, and how to use domestic laws that already exist in their own countries to better enforce and deal with the problem of anti-Semitism. All right, so I'll share my screen with you now. Okay, so we call this project From Words to Action, and this is exactly what we mean. We mean that IHRA right now is, you know, is very nice. You know, we see a lot of world leaders that, you know, it's a beautiful photo op. They say, oh yeah, we want to fight anti-Semitism, and anti-Semitism is horrible. We adopted IHRA, but what is the tachlis? What are you really doing to take this IHRA definition and change it from words to action? And this is what this project is about. So what we do is that we show people that even though we thought anti-Semitism has passed from the world, you see all these different caricatures that are not from 1930 Germany, but they're actually from 2019, 2020. They're happening now every day all over the world. So this is a bit of background about what I already told you, that the plenary of IHRA has decided to pass this definition of anti-Semitism on May 26, 2016. So the language of IHRA, and I'll do it pretty quickly, there are 12 different examples of what can constitute anti-Semitism according to IHRA, and we'll just review them really quickly. So the first one, we call them, the headlines in red is names that we've given them. It's not the language itself, but we call it justifying harm. So this is, I think, something that most people will instinctively kind of understand, calling for justifying killing or harming Jews, etc., etc. The second type is demonization and stereotypization. And we all know these different stereotypes about the Jews that we collect, that we control the economy or the media or the governments or this and that. So this is another form of anti-Semitism according to IHRA. Collective blame. So accusing Jews as a people, please mind that, as a people, that it doesn't necessarily mean religion or race, it means as a people, of being responsible for real or imagined wrongdoing. And this is the type of thing that talks about the blood libels that we see all day, every day. So this is, according to IHRA, also is anti-Semitic. Holocaust denial, I think it's very important that IHRA decided to include that. We see that more and more these days. This, according to IHRA, is anti-Semitic. This is the next one is more or less a continuation of the previous one, and it's not just Holocaust denial, it's Holocaust is a Jewish conspiracy, which is the next step for Holocaust deniers. Again, anti-Semitic according to IHRA. Dual loyalty. Now this is a huge problem in the world. I think where I've seen it most is in the United States. They love to say it, and this is very important that this is included here, that accusing Jews of Jew loyalty is anti-Semitic. Okay, now this is, I don't know if you felt we're kind of getting closer to the minefield, but the Jewish right of self-determination. This is something that was included in IHRA. So denying the Jewish people's right to self-determination. This is something that brought on a lot of criticism, and people just simply don't understand, and it's important for me to clarify it. This means that the Jews have the right of self-determination to determine that, that we are a religion, a race, and a people, and that we have a right to exist, to have our own independent state. So, as you can see, it does not say anything about borders. It does not negate anyone else's right of self-determination. It does not pretend to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There's nothing about it that should really be so controversial. All it says, like every other people in the world that wants their right of self-determination, this is what this article means. If you are unwilling to accept the Jewish right of self-determination in any borders, then you are anti-Semitic. If you are critical of Israel's policy, of the current borders, of the territories, of the prime minister, whatever, that is not within the scope of this specific section of IHRA. But if you are unwilling, as I said before, to even acknowledge, to even respect the Jewish right of self-determination in any borders whatsoever, then that means, according to IHRA, that you are anti-Semitic. The next one, I think, also is something that we see a lot in the rhetoric against Israel from our haters around the world, and that is to apply some kind of a double standard for Israel that doesn't exist really in the world for anyone else. And so, again, if you are applying a double standard, it is anti-Semitic according to IHRA. And the last one is also very interesting. We call it from the Jewish people to the Jewish state. And that is basically what we see now, is that they take all the symbols and the blood libels and the rhetoric that comes from classic anti-Semitism, right? Like the Jews killed Jesus and all kinds of stuff like that. But now they use it not to characterize the Jewish religion or Jews because of their religion, but they use the same language to characterize the state of Israel or Israelis. So this is also, I think, a very important addition that IHRA made, and this also is anti-Semitic according to IHRA. Okay, now we'll just review a few examples very quickly. So the first one, we start from the light and then go to the more complicated ones, but I think this is something that I hope most people would identify as anti-Semitism right off the bat. And if you see all these Jewish characteristics, right, like the Jewish nose and Jew is a spider and it's sitting and taking over the world, well, it's very easy if you look at IHRA and the language of IHRA. Again, don't say anymore, it feels anti-Semitic to me, or it makes me angry, or anything like that, but go to the legal definition. This is not you saying it. This is a collective of experts from all over the world and the countries that have already adopted it that are saying that according to this legal language, this is anti-Semitic, and it's a very important distinction. This is somewhat similar to the other one, but I've deliberately wanted to put one that kind of shows the Jewish octopus taking over a mosque, which I think some people might try to excuse by saying that it's a legitimate criticism, the Jews are taking over Muslim land, or whatever they want to say. So again, this is not me arguing with you. This is IHRA telling you that according to the dehumanization and the demonization and the stereotypes and the accusation against the Jews of a wrong or a real wrongdoing, this is anti-Semitic. Okay, this, I really, I love this example. It's a beautiful example. Look at that. Look at the right one, okay? This is right before Passover last year, okay? So this is about a year ago. So they're saying here on the right, army injures 27 Palestinians, including a newborn baby in Nablus. And look at what this brilliant person is saying at the top, all to celebrate the Passover, okay? Very similar, the one on the left is talking about 95% of Gaza's water is unfit to drink. Of course, this is everything is because of Israel. And again, if we're looking at the IHRA definition, then we can use the IHRA definition to prove to whoever is listening to us, whether it's a law enforcement agent, it's a prosecutor, it's a school, it's the dean of a school, it's our neighbor, next door neighbor. We can show the definition and say, look, you're using symbols and images associated with classic anti-Semitism, right? All to celebrate Passover and the little baby, the blood. We all know that type of that blood libel. It's also classic anti-Semitism, accusing Jews as a collective of being responsible for wrongdoing. And of course, again, the stereotypes, demonizing Jews and all of that. All right, the next one. I usually, when I do this face-to-face, I love to see people's faces and reactions. And unfortunately, I don't have that luxury today. But the next example, I think, is important. This is a headline from the B'Tselem website: "Land grab, Israel's settlement policy in the West Bank." And so it's very important for us to also understand what does not constitute anti-Semitism according to IHRA. So this is, you know, whether we agree with it or not, and whether this annoys us or not, it is not relevant. This is a criticism of Israel, and therefore it cannot be regarded as anti-Semitic according to IHRA. And I think it's very important for us, especially at this early stage where there aren't many cases, legal cases, where they've used IHRA. There aren't many precedents yet of the use of IHRA in the world, that we cannot afford to try to overexpand our reach. This is something that we need to be very mindful to, and this is something we need to be very careful about. So I think in the beginning, especially in the early stages like this, where it's a touch and go situation, it's a very sensitive situation, we need to be very careful of you know, who we are accusing of being anti-Semitic and how we are trying to use IHRA. So this is an example of something that does not fall within the definition of IHRA. All right, look at that. The picture on the left is completely fabricated, by the way. For those of you who know the IDF, this is not an IDF uniform. This is not a CAEF, it's a type of charity box. Of course, they did it on purpose to try to trick people into thinking that, you know, this Nazi youth girl is exactly the same like this IDF soldier or whatever she's trying to be. And what is IHRA saying about this? Again, Holocaust inversion and classic anti-Semitism, 100% anti-Semitic. Okay, so why did I show you this video? Because this video, I think, you know, kind of brings a lot of emotions out of a lot of us, and we hear it a lot, and it's just, you know, but we need to, again, be very careful and minded of the situation. So let's divide what they were saying. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. So let's divide that into two parts, okay? From the river to the sea, what does that mean? It means that they want to replace Israel. That means that Israel should not exist. That means that Palestine should replace Israel and wipe it off+existence. So I think that part, that first part, even though it's very well disguised, because, you know, I will dare to say that 90+% of people in the world, even people that support the Palestinian cause, or maybe even people that support the Israeli cause, don't know that from the river to the sea means, you know, Israel will cease to exist. So we can definitely go to IHRA and say the Jewish right of self-determination, as I said in the beginning, if you deny the Jewish right to exist in any border, from the river to the sea, that is anti-Semitic, okay? And the next part of the sentence, and I'm doing that this exercise with you intentionally, Palestine will be free. If it didn't go together with the first part of the sentence, people can say Palestine will be free or should be freed, whatever. And this, according to IHRA, is not anti-Semitic, okay? It's just the first part of that sentence that negates the Jewish right of self-determination. Now, I wonder how many of you, I can't ask you and I can't see, but I wonder how many of you are, remember Ahed Tamimi. Now, Ahed Tamimi, that was a story. Now, this girl comes from a very infamous family in the West Bank, and she became a symbol to the Palestinian cause by trying to hit and spit and do all kinds of things to IDF soldiers. Eventually, she was arrested, and she then became this icon. So the question is this anti-Semitism or not? Again, I think it's a very important example, even though this might be very upsetting to us. I don't see how we can fit this example into one of the articles of IHRA, and therefore it's criticism of Israel, and it cannot be understood as anti-Semitic according to IHRA. Okay? Now, this is something I think that we see often in different variations of it. Just look at the details. I think these people are just unbelievable. Look at the face, look at the evil grin, look at his forehead. Of course, he's Hasidic. Look at the keys he's holding, USA, UK. Of course, the Jew is holding world power in his hands. And look at the blood here. And the people, of course, the skeletons and the dead bodies and the baby and the poor woman. And I wonder if you guys know what the key is. The key symbolizes the return to Palestine. This is the right of return. Return to Palestine means from the river to the sea. Of course, again, Israel will no longer exist. And so, is this anti-Semitic? Well, we see basically almost every article of IHRA is reflected here, and it's very easy to explain to people. Some people might say that it's just criticism about 1948's war against the Palestinians and how Israel have treated the Palestinians or sent them into exile, all kinds of stuff like that. But if we now turn the discussion and show people how this violates every single article of IHRA, then we can win this argument, not based on going back and try to convince them of what happened in 1948, but because this is anti-Semitism according to IHRA. Okay, I just now want to show you a few examples of how we can use domestic laws, as I indicated in the beginning. So this is an example of something that happened in the United States and at Emory University, where Jewish students got kind of eviction notices. It says here, we regret to inform you that your suite, your dorm, is scheduled for demolition in 3 days. I just want to say this. The students who got this were Jewish, not necessarily even pro-Zionist activists, or there was no specific targeting, but the targeting of Jews because they're Jews. And this is something that the Americans we had a very hard time doing anything about this before the executive order. Trump's executive order was signed on December 2019, and this is now a powerful tool for us to battle against these type of anti-Semitic incidences, especially on college campuses, which was a huge problem before, but now we have a really strong weapon of fighting the universities and fighting every establishment that is allowing this type of behavior to exist on campus. So I've added the language of the executive order. If anyone has a question about that afterwards, I'll be happy to expand on it some more. And of course, it referenced the IHRA definition. So a few examples from different countries, different laws. There's an Equal Treatment Act in Netherlands. It talks about discrimination. There's also a criminal code in France that talks about that crimes of this nature are actually criminal. You can sit in prison, you can have a penalty. Many similar laws exist all over Europe and other countries as well. This is something very nice. Okay, so this lovely, lovely, lovely woman is asking us to go back to the ovens. This is something I brought a special, there's an example here from Canada, where there's also a criminal code advocating for genocide. I believe this is advocating for genocide. I don't see any other way of looking at it. But again, the IHRA definition will help make it clear for people, for law enforcement and others, why this is anti-Semitic and should be criminalized. Opa. Okay, so different things like racial hatred, there are different prohibitions on speech and harassment and intimidation. The list is long. This is another example very similar to the one I showed before. Again, sometimes people tell me when I ask, you know, and when I do my my lectures with a big crowd, I ask people, do you think this is anti-Semitic? So they look at Ariel Sharon. For those who knows, he was the Prime Minister of Israel. They say, oh, it's a political speech. What do you want? I mean, the guy was the Prime Minister. There was a war against the Palestinians. It's political speech. Well, you know what? If you look at IHRA, I think it's easier to understand this is not a legitimate criticism. And again, if you look here on the right, I just want to show you a few things like the Americans paying off Ariel Sharon, or you know what, let's go back a little bit for a second. The Americans are paying him off. You see one hand says funding, the other hand says massacre. You see the teeny tiny little Palestinian here and the nuclear sign. And look at here, this, I think this is extremely creative. Sharon Antichrist, okay? Remember that we said taking classical anti-Semitic references or blood libels and linking them with the new type of anti-Semitism. Well, this is exactly a good example of that. Anyway, I have a lot of more of these, but maybe it's time to take a few questions. Andrea, what do you think?
Okay, I noticed several people, can everybody hear me? I noticed several people actually had their hands up while you were speaking, so I think we have a few questions. And just before, I have one or two to start with, before people, I don't see hands up. I would like to know how you think IHRA can be applied at universities, because in Canada and maybe elsewhere, the greatest amount of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism seems to be on our campuses. And it started here 15 years ago at U of T with the Israel Apartheid Week, and it's grown. What could be done on campus? Okay, well, first of all, I think I want to make a distinction, because you see it on campus, but it doesn't mean that this is where you know the anti-Semitic activity is necessarily this is where you know the center of anti-Semitism is happening in Canada. This is just where you see it or you're sensitive to it because of course your children are going to colleges. But Canada has already adopted IHRA into, they passed a resolution and IHRA was adopted. So I definitely think that, first of all, we need to find a case that will be, you know, a strong enough case, well enough documented, and this should be taken as a warning and maybe create a positive precedent. Now, first step, obviously, is to send letters and to sit down with the university leadership and try to show them IHRA, explain it to them, and maybe in a very subtle way try to threaten them that this is a case that you can take to court. Now, what is important for me to say is that the first case is of huge importance, okay? Don't just take a random case that make you feel very, very angry and try to test it in court, because if you lose, then you create a bad precedent for everybody, and this is the worst thing that you can do. What is important for me to tell you, if there's one thing that you will hear me say today, is that prepare your students. Document, document, document. You have to come with a strong case of not an isolated incident or not something that can be understood as hearsay, and not one student that said, they told me, they did it to me, and it's not documented and there's no evidence. If you can, bring a number of students, not just one student, to describe their experience over time, to say that they are feeling harassed and discriminated against
because they are Jews or because they are supportive of Israel and their Jewish right of self-determination, okay? Use the language of IHRA. Don't use, you know, an emotional type language. Use a legal language, use IHRA, reference IHRA, and again, come armed to the battle. And if you have such cases that you're thinking about, I do suggest for us to come together. I mean, this is something that we've done in the United States, where, you know, the first cases were brought. We did a, you know, kind of a brainstorming session with a group of experts. We can do the same thing in Canada. We can come together, sit together, think, decide if there are enough evidence, if it's a strong enough case, what are the steps that needs to be taken, you know, how to take it to the university at the first step, and how to take it from there. And I do really believe that that we can create precedents in Canada if we follow those steps.
May
Following
I
up on
say
that.
something at some point? I just wanted, my hand isn't up, but I'd like to acknowledge on Devorah.
Okay. You had a question? It's for
No.
questions, Devorah, not comments. Do you have a question?
No, I don't have a question.
Okay, we need to see if there's another question. I'll follow up with the question based on what you just said, Yifa. Does IHRA provide then a framework or tools to fight BDS overall? Given that there's very strong coalition for boycott and divestment in Canada, can one argue that BDS is in of itself anti-Semitic?
No.
No?
And it's a very good question, and it's very important for us to understand. BDS is not in and of itself anti-Semitic according to IHRA, okay? Now, what is easy to do, okay, with BDS activists is that they use, you know, their actions, their words, their rhetoric, their posts on social media, their activities on college campuses, most of the time, do violate one of the articles of IHRA. So don't say BDS is anti-Semitic according to IHRA, because it's not, but just show what they're doing, what they're saying, how they're saying it, how they're behaving. And it's very easy to, you know, to catch them, you know, for them to trip, basically to trip on their own words or their own actions. So just be very minded of how you phrase it, because you want the person that you're presenting it to pay attention. You want them to, you know, you don't want to cause any antagonism. You know, just be smart about how you present it, and it will have the same result. That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay, Beverly Biederman has a question. Beverly, you can unmute yourself.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I want to thank you for distinguishing between criticism of Israel, criticism of specific Israeli policies, and criticism of the right of Israel to exist. So thank you for that. My comment is that some of the anti-Semitism can come from the top, can come from leaders, can come from what leaders of countries say, and what their followers then agree with or follow or act upon. And according to your definition of anti-Semitism, I believe that there's somebody who has made anti-Semitic claims by implying that Jews have a divided allegiance. They have an allegiance to their country, and they have an allegiance to Israel. Mm-hmm. I also believe that that individual has expressed stereotypes of Jews being unlikable, quote unquote, money grubbers. Mm-hmm. Now, unfortunately, that person is the President of the United States. And I want to know what you think you can do about that. I'm done.
Well, I think, look, this is what I was trying to tell Andrea before, is that, you know, IHRA is a powerful tool, but it's not the almighty tool. I mean, we can't accomplish everything with IHRA, but we can accomplish a lot. Now, when it comes to the President of the United States, I guess, you know, there are all kinds of opinions here and there. I mean, to me, he's just an equal opportunity type of hater, not necessarily against Jews or anyone else. But he has done a lot in comparison to previous presidents to further Israel's goal and cooperation. Bottom line, to answer your question, it would, you know, especially after he signed the executive order, it would be very hard to start at the top, obviously, especially in the United States, where, or in countries where you have immunity to your leaders. I will give you an example about Jeremy Corbyn in the UK. I don't think that anyone of us will argue with the fact that the guy was completely anti-Semitic, really, like something really extreme. And we did use IHRA in the UK to campaign against him, to expose him as anti-Semitic. There were even lawsuits that were filed against him based on the language of IHRA. And so, you know, you really can attack leaders or come to a, you know, an accomplishment using legal tools, even with the higher ups. Obviously, it's just more complicated, and it has to be the strongest case, you know, like Jeremy Corbyn. This was just, the guy was just the gift that keeps on giving. If you wanted to collect evidence and information about him being anti-Semitic, all you had to do was listen to him speak or look at his Twitter feed, or, you know, it was just, you know, we were like, we made a joke one day. We said, you know, make it a little bit challenging. Like, this is getting boring. It's too easy. So yeah, it can be done. Trump, different story.
I have a question here someone submitted on Q&A. If someone speaks about it being okay to bomb Israeli citizens, is that anti-Semitic?
Well, yeah, that is calling for a genocide, justifying harm. I'll show you again, if I can do that. Working from home has its challenges. Where are you? Okay, well, if you remember, the very first thing that IHRA shows us is justifying harm against Jews. So this is calling for genocide. There's no doubt about it. It's anti-Semitic 100%.
A gentleman by the name of Mark sent an earlier question, and I hope Mark is listening. He asked if you had an opinion, this is slightly different from a legal opinion, about the fact that it would appear almost every 70 years Amalek appears. If you start with the biblical story of Amalek offending and hurting the Jews, and 70 years since the Holocaust, here we are again. And he would like to know whether you have an opinion about this being a cycle that will just continue.
Well, I think, well, I wish it was a 7-year-old cycle. I think it's a constant battle, you know, because I am a third generation to the Holocaust, and so I was born and raised in Israel, thank God, and my mother was also born in Israel. And both of my grandparents are Holocaust survivors. So if I look at my family alone, then, you know, my grandparents survived the Holocaust and came here, built this country, and fought the War of Independence. And then my parents had to fight all the other wars, you know, from the Sinai War to the 6-Day War to the Yom Kippur War, Lebanon War, and then I was born. And you know, the fight continues. So we fight Hezbollah, and we fight the Iranians, and we fight the Saudis, and we fight Hamas, and I wish it was, at least we had like a breather in between. But you know what, if you know, it's kind of not the issue of today's topic, but I'll tell you this. I think that it does, in a way, it doesn't justify it, and I think we will all be happy without it, but I think it does create people that are strongly united, you know, at least in a time of need, highly creative, very strong, very independent. I mean, if I look at my country today, I don't think I can be more proud. I mean, you have no idea the level of volunteer work that exists. I have joined the IDF Civil Assistant Command Center, and there are hundreds of thousands of people every day in the streets that go and volunteer to help the elderly and the sick and the needed and the children, and working on a cure and different. I think to some extent we are better off for it, although I think we would all kind of be happy without it as well.
Right. Okay, Devorah, do you have a question? I see your hand is up and your mic is open. Do you have a question now?
I'd like to talk a little bit about how wonderful your tools are and how well you educated us. In that context, I'd like to ask you how we in the Jewish community, and I'm an educator, we in the Jewish community not only can prepare our high school students, but our students in the day school before they enter their high school, before they enter the university program. And they themselves can work with you when they have your tools. They can work with their colleagues. They can work with people in their classrooms. They can educate them in a way that you've been able to tell us you are working so well with people our age. Now, I'm a grandparent. I have been looking for a way that I can work with my grandchildren. Well, I can't, but I think we should be able to work with our day schools and our other schools in our synagogues to get children at a developmental stage that is earlier than high school. I don't know if you wanted this question or not, but
Thank you, Devorah. Thank you. We'll let them.
that question.
Yeah, let Yifa answer. That's a great question.
I think it is a great question, and I'll tell you this. I mean, I've created this presentation, I think 3 months ago, December, yeah, something like that. And since then, I've done this with college students, high school students, and also a group of attorney generals, state attorney generals from the United States. I got a phone call one day from the foreign ministry asking me to do this with this delegation of attorney generals. Let me tell you this, I've done public speaking for years, but this was a bit intimidating. You know, these are the attorney generals of 20 different states in the United States, and now I have to now teach them and preach to them about how they're not really enforcing laws of anti-Semitism. But it was so well received, you have no idea, and they've admitted to me that they just could not connect the dots themselves. And to go back to your question, high school students, college students, I mean, so obviously the level of legal lingo is lessened. Even with you now, when I spoke to the attorney generals, obviously the talk was a lot more legal. But if you say that you got it and you appreciate it, then, you know, use the same materials. If you want, I'll send you the presentation, take it, change it, do whatever you want with it. Let's train people to do it themselves. Let's create an army of people that can do this presentation or a similar presentation. Let's create booklets. I mean, really, now there's a time for us to deal with things that we didn't have the time to deal with, like write booklets and prepare PowerPoint presentations. I mean, this is something that, you know, for 12 years since I've started doing this, I've been running 24/7. Now it's the first time I get a chance to sit down and say, you know what, let's prepare. And so by all means, you know, let's build something together. Let's,
we will be posting the presentation. I can let everybody know that. And Yifa, just before I go to raised hands, there's another question that was submitted by David Schlanger, and it is, why is BDS not seen as a violation of IHRA when no other country is being boycotted for their behaviors or actions?
So again, I was trying to say that sometimes we need to be, it's better to be smart than to be right. So by saying BDS, I think for most people it becomes political. It's controversial, unfortunately. We still haven't been able to educate the public that BDS is, as you say, David, anti-Semitic in and of itself. However, if you don't come with the BDS message, but you come with the message of saying, here's a group that accuses us, that applies double standards. Here is a group that wants us, that doesn't respect the Jewish right of self-determination. Here is a group that is harassing students on college campuses. I mean, if you use the language of IHRA and not go with the BDS first, then you win. It's the same result. And then slowly but surely people will do that, they will connect the dots and say, oh, all of these groups are BDS groups. Maybe BDS is in and of itself anti-Semitic. That's my suggestion, just strategy.
Okay, thank you. I have a question from Bonnie Barascan. So Bonnie, unmute yourself.
Sure, I did. Thank you, Yifa. Wonderful presentation. Thank you for trying again. I also have a political question. I was thinking of Bernie Sanders and the Democratic Party, and I was thinking of how strange it would have been if he was successful to have a Jewish president who was often very critical of Israel, etc. And so my question for you isn't just about Bernie Sanders and the Democratic Party. It's how do we deal with the people within our own fellowship, fellow Jews, who often make statements that one could call anti-Semitic. It's difficult and painful.
Well, yes, I want to tell you, I mean, usually, Bonnie, I mean, you were here last week, and I have all these people trying to ask what they think is hard questions, usually when I do my public speaking, and I think the trick is this, and I enjoy it, and I'm very good at it, and I love to see, that moment, their eyes, something happens in their eyes, and then you got them, you flip them, and I think the trick is this: if you need to narrow the argument, the question that the discussion revolves around, and it's very easy to be tempted to argue about everything. 1948, refugees, Israel's policy, this, that. If you are strong in your strategy and you keep the discussion focused. So, for example, if someone said something that you think, like you said, that you think is anti-Semitic, don't let them, make this a conversation about everything. Be the one who keeps bringing the conversation back to where it started. Yes, but I am now speaking only about your comment about this and this and this and this. And then you can use the language of IHRA, tell him this is not me saying, this is the world, this is an international organization, expert. I mean, this was done in Sweden, for God's sake. I mean, no one can ever accuse them of being Zionist. This is an international organization. And this is the advantage of using a legal definition and not just, emotions. So what I'm saying, again, my trick is this: keep the conversation focused and try not to let people make it about everything, because then you will never win the argument.
Thank you. I have a question now from Judith Benatar. Do you want to unmute? Are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes.
Hi, Judith.
How are you? I'm just wondering, there are a lot of people here in Toronto who would love a lawsuit being launched, and I understand the importance of doing something that will actually win. Have you, in all your involvement coming back and forth to Toronto and dealing with Andrea and all sorts of people here, have you identified anything that you would like to do here? Because we have lots of people who would like to help you do it.
Maybe just before you speak, Yifa, I should let people know that our organization has put 5 university presidents on notice that we are investigating the possibility of suing over their continued allowance and given campus resources to the Israel Anti-Apartheid Week groups, including the various student organizations that sponsor them.
Great.
So first I would like to apologize. I haven't been to Toronto in a long time. and I will be back hopefully soon after this crisis is over. So no, I mean, I was involved a little bit. I mean, some groups have contacted me about, you know, the thing that happened in York University a couple of months ago, and there were a few other things. But I wasn't involved in anything that in any group that were saying we're trying to, you know, to build a lawsuit. And I'll be happy to help with that, because as I said, I mean, we that I think that is the advantage of my organization, that we do have a, you know, a kind of a strategic overview of the world, and we know, you know, what worked where, who has done what, how this maybe is a smart way of doing something, not so smart way of doing something. So I invite you all, if you want to do something, to contact me. I'm happy to help, to consult, to bring in other experts, people that we've worked with in the States or in Europe, whoever is relevant. And so I think together we will probably have the best, you know, the best way to go forward.
Thank you very much. I've just noticed it's exactly 3 o'clock, and we need to bring this to an end. I want to thank you, Yifa. I want to thank the 52 people that had signed on, and ask that if you have any comments or suggestions, so please forward them to my attention, just at andrea@caef.ca. I'd be happy to forward them on to Yifa, and to also make sure that you all are alerted to the posting of this recorded webinar when it's available. Thank you very much, and I wish everybody a happy Pesach and stay well. Thank you.
Thank you very much.